Hi guys, and welcome to Suffer the Little Children, the true crime podcast giving voices back to the victims of child abuse and shining a harsh spotlight on the parents, guardians, and caretakers who silenced them. I'm your host, Laine, and this is episode 8, Alissa Guernsey. I first learned about Alissa's story years ago when it was in the news. She's had a special place in my heart for a very long time, but her story has always been too intensive, tragic, and daunting to tackle. Because April is Child Abuse Awareness Month, I finally buckled down and put together the most comprehensive account possible of the life and death of 16-month-old Alissa Guernsey, the criminal case that followed, and the aftermath of both. In 2009, Alissa died while living in the home of her mother's cousin, Christy Shaffer. Her injuries were horrifying, and her death was ruled a homicide caused by blunt force trauma. Her caretaker, Christy, was charged in her death, but when you hear what ultimately came of this case, I guarantee you're going to be as baffled, heartbroken, and furious as I am. Alissa only lived for 16 months, but her impact will be felt forever. My sources for today's episode were the South Bend Tribune, WTHR 13 Investigates, Inside Edition, Baby Alissa Cries for Justice Facebook page, Healthline, Lighting Their Way Home blog, Angel is Dee's Place, The Indianapolis Recorder, KPC News, Documenting Reality, Change.org, and court documents. Before I dive into the story, just a quick tangent. Please stay away from other people and follow the COVID-19 social distancing recommendations. If you have to go out for supplies, wear a mask, sanitize your hands before and after your trip, and even sanitize your bags and your groceries once you get home. My former mother-in-law, my kid's grandmother, works the register at a large supermarket. Last week, she came down with a fever and a cough. She hasn't been tested for the virus because tests are all but impossible to find, but her doctor believes she has it. She's now quarantined at home with my former father-in-law, who has COPD. Both of them are in their 70s and recent cancer survivors. We can't visit them or offer them help. My kids and their dad are driving over to their apartment building to park across the street so they can all wave at each other, and that's the extent of the family's Easter celebration. I'm hoping with all my might that this won't be the last time my kids see their grandparents. For God's sake, people, don't go out any more than you have to, please. Again, April is Child Abuse Awareness Month, and we all need to be aware as well that a lot of kids are quarantined at home right now with abusive parents whose fuses are extra short thanks to financial pressures and other fallout from this godforsaken pandemic. The longer people refuse to inconvenience themselves by self-quarantining, the longer these kids remain at a higher risk of severe injury or even death at the hands of their parents. It sucks and it's scary, but if you've heard this podcast before or read any of my articles on sufferthelittlechildrenblog.com, you know people are capable of doing terrible things to their children. Okay, I promise that's the end of my soapbox rant for today. Now, let's talk about Alissa. Blonde, brown-eyed Alissa Beth Guernsey was born on November 2, 2007 in Columbia City, Indiana, to parents Kelly Sprunger and Michael Guernsey. By all reports, Alissa was her daddy's pride and joy. Her mommy, with whom Alissa shared a birthday, called Alissa her bitty-bitty pretty. Her uncle, Tyler Sprunger, said this about her.
Cute, smiley, big smile. She loved just to cuddle up and snuggle right up with you. She was just a little cutie.
Less than 3 weeks after Alissa's first birthday, her father, Michael, was killed in a one-car wreck on I-69 southbound. Alissa's mom, Kelly, was grief-stricken at the loss of her fiancé. With her history of depression and drug dependency on top of the tragedy, she didn't feel she was capable of caring properly for her 3 children, 6-year-old Lily, who was a double amputee, 3-year-old Noah, and 1-year-old Alissa. Kelly didn't want her babies in foster care. Thinking she was doing the right thing, Kelly agreed to let her cousin, 29-year-old Christy Shaffer, and her husband, 34-year-old Matt, care for Kelly's children while she attempted to recuperate. On December 8, 2008, Christy told DCS she would be happy to take in Kelly's children, but that she wished she knew how long she would have them. The kids were placed into her home in Topeka shortly thereafter, despite Kelly's mother, Beth, telling DCS on December 10th that she did not want her grandchildren in foster care either, and she was willing to take the kids. At Alissa's first appointment with Topeka pediatrician Dr. John Egley on December 10, 2008, for a foster care physical, he determined that everything was within normal limits and that Alissa was a healthy, happy baby who was meeting her developmental milestones on time. Unfortunately, instead of getting back on her feet, Kelly descended deeper into drug use and neglected to keep in contact with her caseworkers. DCS wanted her to take a drug test, but she refused, leading to a citation for neglect after what DCS deemed amounted to abandoning her children. Lily, Noah, and Alissa were declared wards of the state of Indiana, and Matt and Christy Shaffer, who had no training as foster parents, were given temporary custody. They qualified as official foster parents not because they had any training, but because they were relatives of the kids, and because they had taken guardianship of Kelly's older two children in the past when Kelly was incarcerated. The three children added to the Shaffers' already large brood, which included, at the time, Matt's daughter, 12-year-old Haley, as well as the couple's three children, 9-year-old Braden, 7-year-old McKenna, and 3-year-old Ashlyn. At the time, the children were placed in the Shaffer home at 315 West Pine Street in Topeka. Both Christy and Matt were unemployed. Matt received a weekly unemployment payment of $360 and a child support payment for Haley every other week in the amount of $160. On December 15th, Christy missed her first scheduled court hearing, claiming she had a migraine and that two of the kids were sick. It should be noted that 6-year-old Lily received SSI benefits. On January 6, 2009, Christy filed a petition asking for Lily's SSI payments of $637 a month to be allocated to the Shaffers. DCS paid a visit to the children on January 12th, noting that they all appeared happy and healthy. Christy reported they were doing well. Before long, however, things took a dark turn. With both adults unemployed, finances were understandably tight, and with 7 kids in the house, tensions no doubt ran high. It seems Christy singled Alissa out among the many children living in her home as the scapegoat for her frustrations. During the 110 days Alissa spent in the Shaffer home, she went from a normal, healthy, bubbly little girl with a quick smile to a nervous, quiet, withdrawn child. Family members who were able to see her during this time thought she appeared pale and sickly and noticed bruises on the baby's face and head. But because the Shaffers, who were the kids' blood relatives, had taken Kelly's children in out of the supposed kindness of their hearts, no one suspected Alissa was being abused. On January 27, 2009, Alissa received one suture in Dr. Egley's office for a 2-centimeter laceration on the left side of her forehead, an injury she supposedly received from a fall. The suture was removed on February 2nd, and the doctor did not note any other issues at that time. On February 5th, Christy reported Alissa's fall and injury to DCS and asked them about claiming Kelly's children on her taxes. The DCS employee she spoke with described Christy as difficult to work with and said in the report, quote, "I think she is the type of person that needs all the information possible before agreeing to anything," end quote. On February 9th, Christy called DCS to let them know that because Alissa and Noah were sick, she did not want them to attend their scheduled visit with Kelly. This was the beginning of Christy's campaign to prevent Kelly from seeing Alissa, but not Lily and Noah. She always had an excuse about why Alissa was not present, claiming the baby was sick or sleeping. DCS paid the children another visit on February 10th and observed that all of the kids appeared happy and healthy, even though Christy had reported 2 of them sick the previous day. Christy told DCS the kids had a doctor appointment later on in the day, although there's no record of the supposed visit at Dr. Egley's office. Likely to avoid being accused of abusing the baby, Christy began taking Alissa to doctors and specialists, claiming Alissa's hair was falling out and that she bruised easily. Alissa was seen on February 13th in Dr. Egley's office, where the doctor noted the baby had a rash, scabs, and hair loss, as well as bruises all over her face. According to Dr. Egley's records, he suspected an infection was to blame. Blood was drawn for labs, including a complete blood count with differential, a comprehensive metabolic panel, and a test for thyroid-stimulating hormone to test for any pathology. In the few months Alissa and her siblings lived with the Shaffers, the baby was seen by doctors at least 15 times. Christy tried to pass off Alissa's medical issues on fetal alcohol syndrome and lack of prenatal care, even alleging Alissa was born addicted to meth and crack, although medical records and tox screen reports taken when Alissa was born showed she was perfectly healthy and normal. Christy claimed Alissa was clumsy and difficult to deal with. She also claimed she and Matt had child-proofed their home, put up baby gates to protect Alissa from hurting herself, and even considered getting Alissa a helmet. Despite several rounds of blood tests, including testing for leukemia, none of the physicians consulted found anything medically wrong with Alissa. DCS was notified of Alissa's so-called medical problems. Christy reported to them on February 18th that because of the baby's issues, the doctor had suggested it would be best for Alissa to stay home. The same day, DCS notified Kelly about what had been going on with her younger daughter. Kelly told DCS that she was extremely concerned about Alissa, but it seems nothing was done to ensure the well-being of Kelly's children. Dr. Egley saw Alissa on February 24th for a cough and congestion. The doctor's notes stated, quote, "Physical exam reveals that she is doing well," end quote. Blood was once again drawn. The chart also states, quote, "Parents want her re-examined to make sure that she is all cleared of infection before she gets a repeat CBCD," end quote. The next day, Alissa was back in Dr. Egley's office, this time experiencing vomiting, diarrhea, and fever, and appearing flushed. The notes state that Christy and Matt were reassured. More blood was drawn on February 26th. Also on February 26th, Samuel Cruz, Lily and Noah's father, reported to DCS that he wanted to speak to his children, but that whenever he called Christy's home, she didn't answer and hadn't returned his calls. Dr. Egley saw Alissa yet again on March 3rd after she sustained an injury to her left arm. The doctor's notes for this visit indicate he was told that Alissa had just finished breakfast when she was placed on the floor to play. At that time, Matt arrived home with a family member's dogs after picking them up at the veterinary office. The dogs were excited and bowled Alissa over. Alissa immediately began crying, and it was reported that her left arm was hanging and that she wouldn't use the arm. The doctor's notes also indicate that Alissa once again had bruising on the left side of her face near her eye, and the doctor noted dandruff and hair loss again. X-rays were taken of her arm during this visit. An appointment was made for Alissa to see Dr. Robert Fallon, a specialist in hematology and oncology at Riley Hospital for Children in Indianapolis. At this point, Dr. Egley contacted Steuben County DCS to report the bruises on Alissa's face, but he told them that he did not suspect abuse, and that as he sat with her, another bruise had appeared on her face. As a mandatory reporter, he had fulfilled his obligation to notify DCS, but he downplayed the possibility that it was abuse, which meant they probably wouldn't investigate. On March 4th, a CT scan was performed on Alissa's left arm at Parkview LaGrange Hospital. On March 5th, Alissa was seen by Dr. Fallon at Riley. Unable to find a medical reason for Alissa's bruising and hair loss, the doctor came to the conclusion that the baby must be banging her head against her crib in her sleep. I've never heard of a 1-year-old causing constant and repeated injuries to herself by flailing wildly in her sleep. It's beyond comprehension to me that at this point no one suspected this little girl was being physically abused. On March 11th, Dr. Egley once again saw Alissa, whose left hand was now swollen, and she was still unable to use her left arm, which had been injured 8 days before. When an MRI was finally performed on Alissa's arm on March 19th, it revealed a Salter-Harris fracture type 1, which is an injury to the growth plate area of a child's bone. The growth plate is an area of cartilage at the ends of long bones where most of a child's bone growth occurs. When children become fully grown, the cartilage hardens into bone. It is important to treat these types of fractures as soon as possible to avoid impeding normal bone growth. When he received the results of the MRI, Dr. Egley was informed that this type of injury is concerning for inflicted trauma, but he still did not report these findings to DCS. On March 24th, Christy requested a prescription for Alissa's pain, claiming that Tylenol and Motrin weren't strong enough. Dr. Egley prescribed 20 milligrams of hydrocodone, more commonly known as Vicodin, which he said should last Alissa more than 3 days, even if she was given the maximum dose every 4 hours. Funny that, because on March 26th, Christy called the doctor for more hydrocodone, saying they were nearly out already. Dr. Egley prescribed more, though it's not documented how much he ordered at that time. According to what Christy later told investigators, Alissa's cast slid off her arm on the morning of March 27th. The final incident took place on the evening of March 28, 2009, when Christy packed up Alissa and some of the other children at about 6:45 p.m. to take a trip to a nearby town to pick up Happy Meals at McDonald's and rent a movie at the video store. Alissa was strapped into her car seat behind Christy. During that trip, Christy reportedly became enraged at the 1-year-old baby and began beating her, gripping the screaming toddler's hair and smashing her little head over and over again against the car seat. Alissa soon lost consciousness. Kelly later reported that Lily was sitting next to Alissa when her fatal injuries were administered. According to Kelly, Christy, crying, stopped the car several times on the way back to Topeka to check on Alissa, which Christy told investigators she had not done. Christy told Lily to lift Alyssa's head, but the baby's head kept flopping forward. Lily asked Christy, "What's wrong with Alissa?" Kelly said Christy's response was to yell, "Stop asking that." Christy later told investigators she heard Alissa making snoring or grunting noises from the back seat shortly before they arrived home. When they returned home at about 8:20 p.m., Christy took the other children inside the house to get them situated before she returned for Alyssa's limp body, telling police she had not noticed Alyssa's condition until she brought the baby inside. Christy's brother Nate was an EMT, so this supposedly innocent woman called him instead of dialing 911. Nate, who lived close by, rushed to the Shaffer home and noticed that Alissa, who was already cold to the touch, was unresponsive with no pulse. Finally, at 8:25 p.m., they called 911, and Nate performed CPR on Alissa until first responders arrived at 8:40 p.m. and took over. At 8:52 p.m., Alissa was taken to Parkview LaGrange Hospital, arriving at 9:07 p.m. The medical team worked their asses off for the next 47 minutes to try to save the baby's life, even administering Narcan in case Alyssa's condition had been caused by an accidental opiate overdose, because Christy had reported giving Alissa a 3-milliliter dose of hydrocodone before putting her down for a nap at 2 p.m. Despite the heroic efforts of the hospital staff, Alissa was beyond help, and eventually their life-saving efforts had to cease. Alissa Beth Guernsey, not even a week shy of 17 months old, was pronounced dead at 9:54 p.m. The Shaffers notified DCS's Family Case Matters Division at 10:10 p.m. that Alissa had died. At 1:20 a.m. on March 29th, Alyssa's tiny, battered body was transported to St. Joseph Forensic Center in Fort Wayne, where at 8:30 a.m. on March 30th, an autopsy was conducted by Dr. Scott A. Wagner on the orders of LaGrange County Coroner Bruce Coney. If you want to view the autopsy photos, they're available as a slideshow within my article on sufferthelittlechildrenblog.com about Alissa, posted on April 11th, 2020. The photos are hidden beneath a warning image in the slideshow. They are absolutely horrific. You cannot imagine how awful these photos are, but I think it's important that they're out there and that people see them, so they understand what this baby actually went through, especially considering how the criminal case turned out. But we will get to that. The autopsy revealed several horrendous injuries, including bruises on the top of Alyssa's head, both on the scalp and in the tissue between the scalp and the skull. There were multiple bruises on the baby's face and a fresh contusion on her left thigh. Alissa was missing patches of hair, which was determined to have been torn out rather than falling out on its own. The pathologist found Alissa had suffered bilateral subdermal hematoma, which is blood collecting between the brain and the skull on both sides of her head. Alissa had 2 gruesome lacerations inside her mouth, in the areas where her gums met the inside of her lips, one fresh, one in the beginning stages of healing. She also had a broken left elbow and a growth plate displacement, as well as internal injuries. The toxicology report revealed only Naxalone or Narcan in Alyssa's blood, so Christy's story about giving the baby even a single dose of her prescribed hydrocodone was bullshit. Where did the hydrocodone, which is an opiate, go? Many people believe that Christy herself used it, although she later denied this. During a deposition, Christy was asked about Alyssa's injuries.
Yes, sir. Can you explain to me how the child got all these bruises on his face?
Why can't
Smack the child? Beat the child?
No, never.
Coroner Bruce Coney brought in Dr. Antoinette Lasky, an independent expert from the Indiana University School of Medicine Children's Health Services Research Department, who reviewed the autopsy and medical history reports and determined that Alissa's bruises were most consistent with inflicted trauma and child abuse. Regarding her hair loss, the expert opined that it was highly concerning for someone pulling out Alissa's hair. The report also stated that the baby's arm fracture was not consistent with the family's story of Alissa being bowled over by the dog, rather appearing to be, again, inflicted trauma. That means someone caused this baby's injuries on purpose. The cause of death was ruled to be blunt force trauma of the head, and the manner was determined to be homicide. The Sheriff's Department described Alissa's injuries as obvious signs of abuse. A report by the Indiana Department of Child Services stated that the fatal blow to Alissa was, quote, that of an adult punching a child in the mouth as hard as they could, end quote. So one would expect murder charges to be filed, right? Nothing about this case meets any kind of expectations. Rather than deciding himself if charges should be filed like most prosecutors would, LaGrange County Prosecutor Jeff Weibel, for the first time in his 10 years as a prosecutor, convened a grand jury in the case and let them come to a conclusion about whether or not to charge Christy Shaffer.
It was a very controversial case. It wasn't clear to me what the best charge would be, so I thought a grand jury would be the best remedy for that dilemma.
He said he didn't have a witness. Several children witnessed Alissa's fatal beating, but Weibel pointedly disregarded their highly incriminating witness statements. Thanks to Weibel's complete lack of cojones, the grand jury indicted Christy on a charge of neglect of a dependent, a Class B felony, neglect resulting in serious injury. No murder, no manslaughter, no abuse, not even neglect resulting in death. Joel Shum, a professor at the Indiana University Robert H. McKinney School of Law, spoke to a reporter.
You would expect the prosecutor to look at the evidence and to make a decision based on the evidence the prosecutor had.
Grand juries, according to Professor Shum, are not usually called in Indiana unless the case is politically sensitive, and not usually for cases in which the prosecutor is unsure of which charges to file.
A grand jury process is very secretive, so there's not transparency. We don't know what they were told or what they weren't told or anything else that happened in that process.
That includes what evidence was presented to or withheld from the grand jury, which is why it is impossible to determine why Christy was not indicted on murder or even manslaughter charges, let alone while she was indicted on the neglect of a dependent as a mere Class B felony, neglect resulting in serious injury, as opposed to Class A, which indicates neglect resulting in death. Professor Shum said, quote, I can certainly see no reason why it would be charged this way. In this case, there's no question that there's a death, and if there's neglect and death, you'd expect it to be charged as an A felony, end quote. Class A felonies in Indiana can incur a sentence of 20 to 50 years in prison, while Class B felonies can only bring a sentence of 6 years to 20 years. Well, in that case, Christy made out like a bandit. She accepted a plea bargain, pleading guilty to her piddly little neglect charge, all the while having the gall to deny she caused Alissa's injuries by submitting an affidavit to the court that read in part, although I acknowledge the opinion of an expert witness who determined that Alissa Guernsey died as the result of blunt force trauma, I disagree with the expert's opinion. Even though I am not personally responsible for, nor did I participate in, causing any injuries to Alissa Guernsey, I realize that I am legally responsible for providing timely medical treatment while she was in my care and custody. To add insult to injury, along with Christy's guilty plea, her husband Matthew Shaffer was granted immunity. If they were truly innocent, what did he need immunity from? Christy's plea was accepted by LaGrange County Circuit Court Judge J. Scott Vanderbeck, who, it would later be revealed, had a personal relationship with Christy's family and a pretty massive man-crush on her father. Christy's plea could have landed her in prison for up to 20 years, but she had no criminal history, and dozens of friends and members of her family, including her father and her own children, had written 101 pages of letters to the court, begging the judge to have mercy on her. Some of the same family and friends attended her sentencing hearing on May 25, 2011, making tearful statements for Judge Vanderbeck to be lenient on her. Only 7 pages of letters pleading for justice were sent to the court from the other side of the family. Christy's defense had hired a forensic psychologist who testified at the hearing that in-depth testing performed on Christy showed she displayed a low potential for child abuse compared to people who had been convicted of physically abusing children. Christy's defense attorney called Kelly to the stand during Christy's sentencing hearing and grilled Kelly about her own history of drug use, all but shouting from the rooftops that Kelly bore the responsibility for Alissa's death. I have little fondness for a lot of defense attorneys, particularly the ones who opt to defend the obviously guilty, but my God, what a bottom-feeding piece of shit this attorney must be to try to pin this on Kelly, who only agreed to place her kids with the Shaffers in the first place because she was trying to get her life together for her children. During the hearing, according to the transcript, Judge Vanderbeck was debating with a DCS investigator and Christy's attorney about the level of danger Christy posed to her children. He eventually decided to place Christy's 4 children with her father, Carrie Sprunger. Regarding this decision, the judge said, "I'm not tipping my hand and suggesting that I know what I'm doing yet as to the ultimate resolution. I'm just, you don't get faced with stuff like this, and these people are being nice, and if you take their side and something tragic would happen with a child and a ticking time bomb, that doesn't make them bad. It kind of just makes them at the wrong place at the wrong time." Trying to read that statement now makes me wonder if I'm having a stroke, or if the judge was when he said it. The real takeaways for me are ticking time bomb. Was he referring to Alissa, Christy, or what? And wrong place at the wrong time, which is definitely not how I would describe a sustained pattern of child abuse leading to a baby's brutal murder. Christy herself begged the judge for leniency, telling him the same old bullshit about unexplained bruising, clumsiness, blah, blah, blah. She cried on the stand as she described the many doctor visits Alissa endured as they tried to diagnose her with some medical ailment that would explain the injuries. Christy told Judge Vanderbeck, "Alissa may not have been my biological child, but she was my baby while she lived with us. I lost a child that night too, and a piece of my heart. Your Honor, I beg of you, please not take me away from my children. They are my whole world, and they need me as much as I need them." Judge Vanderbeck swallowed this manipulative shrew's bullshit hook, line, and sinker. Before handing down Christy's sentence, he took the opportunity to throw a completely unwarranted jab at Kelly, telling the courtroom that she shoulders the responsibility for Alissa's death. Fuck this guy, seriously. Then Judge Vanderbeck proceeded to sentence Christy to 10 years in prison, with 6 years suspended. Indiana's good time credit program ensured that the remaining 4 years would automatically be cut in half.
But wait! There's more! Hang on to your seat, baby, because this one's a screamer!
Judge Vanderbeck told Christy's attorney to come back after Christy underwent testing at the Department of Correction Diagnostic Center, and he would, quote, entertain a motion for her early release, end quote. Professor Shum weighed in on this, too.
Very rarely does a judge encourage a defense lawyer to file a motion and ask for a modification. So that's certainly surprising.
Well, Christy and her lawyer did return to court on August 11th, 2011, and guess what happened? Not only did Judge Vanderbeck consider reducing Christy's sentence, he released her right then and there, ordering her to serve 6 months of home detention and 3 years of probation. Christy's total time spent behind bars? 77 fucking days. In his order, Judge Vanderbeck actually wrote, "There's nothing that can be done to bring back the life of the dependent child victim." As if that's the point. Alissa's mom, Kelly, spoke with Inside Edition.
I think she got away with torture. She looked so bad. She was so skinny and she didn't barely have any hair.
Even prosecutor Jeff Weibel, who, as I previously mentioned, has no balls whatsoever, said he disagreed with the judge's decision.
I was against the modification. I did not think it was warranted. 77 days wasn't enough.
Every single person who followed the case and possessed a working brain agreed, including Kelly's brother, Tyler Sprunger, who felt from the beginning that his cousin should have been charged with more than neglect in connection with his niece's death.
There's not a day that doesn't go by where Alissa doesn't pop in my head, how she was basically, in my opinion, tortured to death. The autopsy specifically says homicide due to blunt force trauma to the head. The little girl was covered in bruises. Her hair, it was ripped out of her head. That comes from killing a child.
Tyler also told the reporter, quote, "I love Christy, but what she did was wrong," end quote. He also said about Alissa, quote, "She died a painful death. Blunt force trauma to the head, that's a lot of painful blows. It's not fair for a 15-month-old baby to go out like that. The defendant in this case was never tried for murder, was basically given a slap on the wrist. I don't know how she's not doing life, I really don't," end quote. Tyler created a Facebook page called 77 Days for Murder and organized protests outside the LaGrange County Courthouse to bring awareness to the absolute travesty of justice that was Alissa's case. At the rallies he organized, dozens of people marched, holding signs to let the court and the public at large know about their outrage over Judge Vanderbeck's decision.
I feel it's small-town politics at its best. Somebody knew somebody that knew somebody that, had been involved in the community. The links and the connections are there.
What did he mean by that? Remember how I mentioned earlier that Judge Vanderbeck had a personal relationship with Christy's family? This is Jeff Weibel speaking to a reporter.
I know Christy Shaffer's father. He's a banker here in town, and I've spoken with him on occasion, but he's never been a client of mine, and I've never done any work for him.
Both Vanderbeck and Jeff Weibel have admitted they know Christy's father, Kerry Sprunger, who as recently as 2018 was the chief loan officer and executive vice president of Farmers State Bank, one of the largest banks in LaGrange County. He's now listed as a member of their board of directors. Kerry has long been a prominent business leader in the area. According to a court transcript, Judge Vanderbeck said, "I know Mr. Sprunger. He's been on some boards with me. I know he's got a good heart, and I think I went to a baseball game with his son, so I wouldn't do that if they were bad people." Judge Vanderbeck has denied any conflict of interest and has repeatedly told the media that he cannot discuss his relationship with Christy's family or anything else regarding the case.
"I don't want to talk to you now. Judicial rules of conduct did not allow me to give a statement at this time."
Jeff Weibel also denied there was any conflict of interest in the case. Inside Edition's Lisa Guerrero caught up with Weibel outside his office.
My position was that the judge should not have given her that little time.
Many people think that Christy Shaffer got away with murder. What is your response?
She didn't get away with murder.
Oh, and while I'm discussing possible conflicts of interest, it would be remiss of me not to mention that prosecutor Jeff Weibel spent many years sitting on the board of directors of the LaGrange County Community Foundation with none other than Dr. John Egley, Alissa's pediatrician. Kerry Sprunger was a regular member of the foundation, donating undisclosed amounts of money and other assets. Interesting, huh? Professor Schum said that based on the facts he had reviewed in the case, it was unlikely that Judge Vanderbeck did anything to violate Indiana's Code of Judicial Conduct, but that judges are generally expected to recuse themselves from cases where a conflict of interest may be perceived. In Alissa's case, almost everyone involved certainly perceived a conflict of interest, from Alissa's family down to some of the investigators. He said, quote, "I know some judges would have stepped back because of the perception issue. I think it's imperative the process be seen as fair and the people involved in the process seen as impartial," end quote.
The process is, from the beginning to the end, a very unusual case.
Another law professor from Indiana University, Charles Gay, who specializes in legal ethics, said that based on the transcripts from the 2011 hearing, in his opinion, there were grounds for Judge Vanderbeck to disqualify himself from the case due to his relationship to the family. Quote, "He's made it clear he thinks the world of the father, who's obviously got an interest in this case through his daughter. The applicable standard for disqualification is whether a reasonable person fully informed of the facts would doubt the judge's impartiality. This judge does not sound as though he is saying that standard was met. Rather, he seems to be implying that the concerns are misguided," end quote. On August 17, 2011, 6 days after ordering Christy's release, and not long after the story gained national attention thanks to media coverage, Judge Vanderbeck finally signed an order of recusal and appointment of special judge, removing himself from the case and any future proceedings related to it, including lawsuits Kelly had filed in the matter. The order read in part, "In this case, an inflamed atmosphere has been created by people unconnected to this case. When a judge in a community plagued with methamphetamine use attempts to resolve a dispute involving drug use, family problems, the tragic death of an infant, and conflicting accounts of who's to blame, the rule of law provides guidance for justice. When an inflamed atmosphere follows based on a fictional account of circumstantial evidence that places unsupported blame on the innocent and the judge, not the facts that were presented at hearing, becomes the central focus, it is a sad day for justice in America." In his order, he also listed possible intimidating behavior by members of the public among his reasons for recusing himself. Maybe he and Weibel are members of the same support group for people born without balls. Did they serve on that board together? Citing state law, Vanderbeck named his own replacement, appointing DeKalb Superior Court Judge Kevin P. Wallace as special judge for future proceedings in the case. Even though in his recusal order the judge made reference to conflicting accounts of who's to blame for Alissa's death, Indiana State Police Detective Jeff Boyd said unequivocally that Christy Shaffer was the investigators' one and only suspect. Bernadine Bucafori, the leader of the Baby Alissa Cries for Justice Facebook page and a member of the Alissa's Army movement, spoke with Inside Edition.
This was a little baby. I mean, it's just incomprehensible. She deserves justice. We're going to fight for her until she gets her justice. We're not stopping.
Justice for Alissa! Justice for Alissa!
Alissa's uncle Tyler, who considers what happened to his niece a travesty of justice, said,
"Somebody has to stick up for her because nobody did. You cannot take a life and not have to pay for it."
Several petitions have been created on change.org over the years regarding Alissa's case. The Baby Alissa Cries for Justice team started one such petition in 2012, asking first Indiana's Attorney General and, subsequently, then Indiana Governor Mike Pence, now the Vice President of the United States, to open a state murder investigation of Alissa's fatal beating death. The petition ultimately closed with 72,374 signatures, but the investigation was never opened. The U.S. Attorney General's office acknowledged that they received several petitions on the matter, but says the petitions were being directed to the wrong agency. AG Public Information Officer Brian Corbin told 13 Investigates, quote, "This doesn't fall under the Attorney General's jurisdiction. The Attorney General's office doesn't get to decide whether to reopen a case, and we don't affect outcomes on the trial court level. Concerned citizens should contact the LaGrange County Prosecutor's Office because the prosecutor has the sole authority to decide whether to reopen a case," end quote. That brings us right back around to Mr. Jeff Weibel, who told the news station he sees no reason to reopen Alissa's case. Quote, "I haven't seen evidence to support anything other than what the grand jury indicted her with. If someone has evidence I'm not aware of, tell them to bring it forward," end quote. I wonder if he has seen the autopsy photos himself. A reporter from Fox 55 News contacted Weibel and said the prosecutor responded that he will not reopen Alissa's case, quote, "because no one in Indiana cares about it," end quote. Weibel says he never made such a comment and that he was just playing phone tag with the reporter. He did, however, tell a reporter for the Tribune that of all the letters he received regarding Alissa's case, none came from Indiana. Professor Schum said that even if new evidence was presented, it would be unlikely for Christy to be hit with further charges. Quote, "The state can't go after someone twice. Once the state signed a plea agreement with her, that pretty much put the issue to rest," end quote. Tyler posted on the 77 Days for Murder Facebook page in May of 2012, quote, "To all of Alissa's supporters, I have recently learned that the way Christy Shaffer's plea deal was drawn up, that there is no way possible to ever get her charged with murder or any other greater charge. Although it truly crushes me to admit that justice will never be served to my niece, it also brings me a lot of joy knowing how much she was loved, and to know there are so many good people left in the world. No matter how many signatures we get, no matter how much we protest, there is simply nothing that can be done to her. I want to thank you all so very much for your love and support. Maybe this story has touched some, and at least for future events, it can help some other innocent child get justice. Again, thank you all so very much and God bless." End quote. Tyler has since taken down the Facebook page. 13 Investigates dropped in at the Shaffer house. Matt answered the door and told the reporter it had been a horrible time for the family. Christy refused to talk at the time, and the Shaffers didn't respond to a request for an interview. Kerry Sprunger, Christy's father, also refused to speak with the news station. Kerry has also told inquiring reporters that the case has nothing to do with him. Kelly Sprunger, Alissa's mother, sued the Indiana Department of Child Services, Steuben County, and Ashley Westgate, the DCS caseworker assigned to Alissa's case, for their role in the baby's death, saying Westgate and DCS did not pay enough attention to the frequency of Alissa's injuries. The lawsuit sought damages for an unspecified dollar amount that would make Kelly and her family whole. In October of 2012, DCS agreed to a mediated settlement of $150,000. The settlement did not assign fault to DCS, and the agency stressed that the settlement amount did not reflect the value of Alissa's life. Ashley Westgate no longer works for DCS. Kelly's attorney, Kevin Likes, told the Tribune that he considers a $150,000 mediated settlement with the government agency a victory. Kelly told the reporter that she planned to use the money for surgery for her disabled daughter. The Baby Alissa Cries for Justice Facebook page reported that with the settlement money, Kelly said she bought a car and gave the rest of the money away. In November of 2013, while on probation for the neglect charge, 35-year-old Christy Shaffer was arrested and charged with possession of methamphetamine and maintaining a common nuisance, which are both Class D felonies. A probation officer had evidently received a tip that Christy was taking part in a meth operation, the takedown of which started when 2 LaGrange County men were arrested earlier that month and charged with higher-level felonies related to dealing and possessing meth. The 2 men were evidently making the drug in the garage of Christy's home. Police were searching the home of one of the men when Christy first texted and then called the man's cell phone. John Parrish, an investigator for the prosecutor's office, answered that phone call, a detail I find a little bit hilarious. Christy later admitted to flushing the meth and tutors, or straws, used to inhale smoke, down the toilet after the call. She also admitted to possessing meth. Only after this arrest were Christy's children removed from her home. It boggles my mind that she still had custody of her kids in the first place after her second cousin died in her care. The fact that she allowed a meth lab to operate under the same roof as her children further proves what a shitty, careless parent she is. For anyone unaware, meth production is insanely dangerous. The byproducts of meth labs contaminate the surroundings with highly explosive chemicals and toxic fumes. Meth labs are essentially time bombs. A single spark from any source can ignite the lingering chemicals and cause fires or even explosions. People die in meth lab fires all the time. Even possessing meth in a home with children is, to say the least, a bad parenting decision. Meth is a drug that stimulates the central nervous system and causes a huge amount of neurotoxins to flood the brain. Meth kills brain cells and can lead to psychosis or even fatal strokes, not to mention respiratory problems, heart problems, tooth decay, skin lesions, even death. Let's just say kids shouldn't be exposed to this shit in any way, shape, or form, in any amount, for any reason. The drug charges were a violation of Christy's existing probation, an offense to which she pled guilty in March of 2014. Unlike Judge Vanderbeck, Judge Wallace does not live with his head up his ass, so he sentenced Christy to serve the previously suspended 6 years of her original sentence on her charge of neglect in Alyssa's death. He recommended she be incarcerated in a facility specializing in substance abuse counseling. How unbearably sad that Christy would spend more time in prison for drugs than for the death of her 16-month-old second cousin. But kudos to Judge Wallace for making her pay to the best of his abilities. In the meth case, Christy received another plea deal, pleading guilty to one of the felony drug charges. Her public defender offered Judge Wallace information on an inpatient drug rehabilitation program as an alternative to prison time. Judge Wallace disregarded that and sentenced Christy to an additional 180 days in prison, which he specified would be served after her sentence for probation violation. In January of 2014, Kelly Sprunger filed a lawsuit against Dr. John Egley, accusing him of ignoring the standard of care by not reporting the abuse that led to Alyssa's death. Documents filed in the suit showed that Dr. Egley notified DCF officials of Alyssa's medical issues, but downplayed the possibility of abuse. The court ultimately ruled in favor of Dr. Egley, concluding that, quote, Indiana does not recognize a private right of action for failure to report child abuse, end quote. In that case, what is the point of a mandatory reporter? In the 2014 Indiana judicial elections, Judge Vanderbeck ran for re-election to the LaGrange County Circuit Court. He competed in the Republican primary on May 6, 2014 against R. Larry Helmer and received 58.9% of the vote. In the general election on November 4, 2014, he was unopposed. Judge Vanderbeck retired from the bench on June 1, 2018. Thank God. Also in 2014, LaGrange County prosecutor Jeff Weibel was upset in the Republican primary election by Tim Kaine. In the general election later that year, independent candidate Greg Kenner was elected as the new LaGrange County prosecutor. On October 18, 2015, Kelly and Alyssa's estate were awarded a joint and severable damage judgment against Christy and Matt Shaffer in the amount of $1 million. The court record reads, quote, However, the plaintiffs are precluded from enforcing the judgment as it pertains to Matthew Shaffer for the reason that said judgment has been discharged by the decision and order from the U.S. Bankruptcy Court. End quote. It is doubtful that Kelly will ever see a red cent from Christy. In December of 2015, Christy requested the court release her into a community corrections program after she completed several prison programs, including rehabilitation, and due to good behavior. Judge Kevin Wallace, who is the superhero of this story, denied her request and ruled that she would serve out the entirety of her term in the Indiana Department of Correction. Now there's the judge Alissa deserved in the first place. Christy was paroled from the Rockville Correctional Facility in March of 2016 and has walked free ever since. In June of 2016, Matt and Christy Shaffer divorced. Matt was given sole custody of the couple's 3 children. Alissa's siblings, Lily and Noah, were sent to live with their biological father in Mexico. Alissa Beth Guernsey is buried at Bronson Cemetery in Missouri. Her grave backs up to the headstone, marking the place where her father, Michael L. Guernsey, and her grandfather, John R. Guernsey, are buried. Sadly, Alissa's own grave has no headstone. For several years, a small silver plate was the only marker for her final resting place, although supporters often left toys, flowers, balloons, and other tokens of their love for the little girl to decorate her gravesite. Alissa's army reached out to her grandmother, who owns the cemetery plot where Alissa is buried, and asked if they could pay for a headstone in tribute to Alissa, but their request was refused. Alissa's grandmother told them that the headstone was a family matter and something they would eventually take care of themselves. Undeterred, the Baby Alissa Cries for Justice group collected money for a memorial bench to be placed on a plot they purchased adjacent to Alissa's. The bench was completed in October of 2016 and dedicated in March of 2017. They've asked the local police department to keep a special eye on the monument to avoid vandalism by those who may not agree with its placement. The front of the monument reads, "In loving memory, Alissa B. Guernsey, November 2, 2007 to March 28, 2009. There's an image of a dragonfly, under which it reads, "Since you'll never be forgotten, we pledge to you today, a hallowed place within our hearts is where you will always stay." The back reads, "Peacefully sleeping, resting at last, her weary trials and troubles past. In silence she suffered, in patience she bore, till God called her home to suffer no more. On a dragonfly's wings her soul set free, joyous and playful she will always be. No more sadness, no more pain. Fly high, little one, till we meet again. Forever our baby dragonfly." Jeff Weibel is currently running for Senate. A Facebook group, Say No to Jeff Weibel for elected seat, State Senate District 13, is dedicated to preventing this from happening. In addition, former law enforcement officer Marshall D. Talbert wrote a scathing letter to the editor of KPC News with the subject line, "We can campaign for a candidate or against them." I'm going to read the entire letter because it is absolutely worth quoting. To the editor, Jeff Weibel for Indiana Senate District 13? You've got to be kidding me. I wouldn't vote Jeff Weibel for dog catcher if that were an elected office. When researching Weibel's qualifications, simply do a Google search on the name Alissa Guernsey. Take a good look at the autopsy photographs of baby Alissa. The photographs do not depict neglect of a dependent. They depict a homicide, a murder. Her injuries, seen and unseen, are not the result of being clumsy or being knocked down by the family dog. Her injuries were inflicted. They are the result of a beating. Weibel chose not to charge Christy Shaffer with killing the child. He convened a grand jury, and one has to wonder exactly what they were told. The lesser charge, neglect with bodily injury, certainly did not fit the crime. I was an Indiana state trooper for 25 years and the Howard County Sheriff for 8 years. I have never seen a greater miscarriage of justice than the Alissa Guernsey case. The great thing about living free in America is that we can campaign for a candidate or against them. The more than 100,000 members of Alissa's army will do their part to prevent Weibel's election to another public office that requires public trust and integrity. The army will be back in LaGrange County. We have a constitutional right to congregate, protest, and express our continued displeasure with candidate Jeff Weibel. We have a right to attend candidate debates and public forums. Don't be surprised to find us walking your neighborhoods, outside your courthouse, or at your polling place on Election Day. While doing your research, be sure to review the Channel 13 Investigates and the Inside Edition segments on the Alissa Guernsey case. Weibel refuses to be accessible to the media, acting like a scared rabbit as reporters try to question him. His behavior is unacceptable for an elected public official in a country that guarantees freedom of the press. Weibel was voted out of office last time he ran for prosecutor. You've done your civic duty. Let's leave it that way. Marshall D. Talbert. For much longer than Alissa's not quite 17 months on this earth, her story has been raising awareness of the issues of child abuse, judicial misconduct, and corruption in the justice system. 3 issues about which I feel incredibly strongly. And that's why I'm doing this podcast right now, and why I write Suffer the Little Children blog. Alissa's short life has had an immeasurable impact on thousands of others. Whether we will ever see true justice for Alissa seems unlikely, but at the very least, we must never forget Alissa Beth Guernsey, baby dragonfly, the tiny, blonde-haired, brown-eyed girl with the big, bright smile. Think of Alissa every time you see a dragonfly, and share her story with everyone you can. Alissa deserves to be remembered. That's it for this week, guys. Join me next week for another story. Stay safe, healthy, and please stay away from other people. Please subscribe to Suffer the Little Children on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app. You can also subscribe on YouTube by searching Suffer the Little Children Podcast. Visit the website at sufferthelittlechildrenpod.com, where you can listen to episodes, leave a voicemail, and become a patron for rewards ranging from a shout-out by name on the show to exclusive show merch. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and Tumblr at Suffer the Little Children Pod, and on Twitter at STLCpod. I've posted a photo album for today's case on Facebook and Instagram. Email tips, comments, questions, or case suggestions to sufferthelittlechildren.pod@gmail.com. You can also read about today's case as well as many others at sufferthelittlechildrenblog.com. This podcast was written and produced by Laine. Music and sound effects for the show were created using sounds from audiojungle.com. Always remember, hug your babies a bit closer tonight. Until next week, bye guys.